So it's time for us to talk about more Harlem Renaissance things, right? And we got a book review. And maybe I'm gonna tell you how to do some more Harlem Renaissance readings. So what up, Search fam? Sade here. Welcome or welcome back to the channel. If you are new, and many of you are new, hey, my name is Sade. I'm out here curating and co-creating a cool ass life. And frequently these days it is talking about books because filming and editing book content has been easier in this day and time. But whether this is your first time coming across my little corner of the internet or you keep coming back, have not subscribed yet, might I invite you to join my internet family by hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, and being made aware of every time that I post a new video, which is usually on the weekends. Okay, so I have y'all at my desk area because I feel like I'm more in professor mode right now because we're not only going to do a book review, but I'm going to also hopefully help you feel comfortable foraying into Harlem Renaissance literature. Okay, great. So today we're talking about Harlem Rhapsody by Victoria Christopher Murray, which I just finished like a couple of days ago. And it was so good, y'all. I can go on and spoiler alert you right now. Like, it was just a fantastic book. So first of all, let me say that I waited, I don't know, months to get my hands on the audiobook for Harlem Rhapsody. And I did the audiobook. I tried with the physical book sometime last year and had a hard time getting into it. So usually when I have a hard time getting into literature, because I'm one of those people where if it's a good book, but it doesn't start picking up until a little bit later, then I might not get through the first however much I need to get through before I'm locked in. So in that case, I usually try to do audiobooks because I listen to my audiobooks quite fast. So that helps me to get through those first parts of books more quickly. And sometimes I switch over and go from physical audiobook to physical book. Sometimes I immersive read, any of the things. But this novel is about Jessie Redmon Fauset, who was the literary editor for the Crisis magazine, which was the premier periodical for the NAACP. And she held that title for 6 years. So from like 1921 to 1926. And she's called the midwife of the Harlem Renaissance or something like that. And that is because she put a lot of iconic Harlem Renaissance writers on. And I just loved this novel, one, because it is historical fiction and you got the story of Harlem Renaissance writers and publishing and things like that. Also through the lens of some mess, child, because it's against the backdrop of her long-going affair with W.E.B. Du Bois. Child. And this I didn't know prior to hearing about the book some time ago. And I was like, ooh, I love a little tea, baby. Because like one of my favorite Harlem Renaissance stories to tell people is how Langston, Hughes, and Zora and Hurston fell out because they were friends initially and very close friends. But that's a story for another time, y'all. But so I really loved this book because, one, Jessie Redmon Fauset, when the book starts, is 37 years old. And in the 1920s, that's a big deal. She's essentially chosen to be a spinster, right? And so you have the sort of plot points of what it means for her to be an older woman who is single. Her mother, who is a Jewish woman who married her father, a black man, and essentially became her stepmother, is there, and how her mother, this is prior to the Supreme Court case. I think it's Loving versus Virginia, which was like 1959, maybe, that was ratified in the Supreme Court overturning the illegality of interracial marriage. So for her stepmother to do that was a really big deal at the turn of the century, right? I also, one thing that for me as a scholar of religion was really cool is that I didn't realize that Jessie Redmon Fauset is the sibling of Arthur Huff Fawcett, who was an anthropologist and writes Black Gods of the Metropolis, where he studies what are called Black religious cults in the early 20th century. So we're talking about the Nation of Islam, the Black Jews, and like 5 other small sects that pop up in the early 20th century. So I didn't realize that they were siblings, which is tea for me. That was very cool because there's also appearances of her brother Arthur in the novel. But I think one thing that is good to sort of keep in mind is that this is historical fiction, right? So many of the things that are happening did not actually happen, but rather Victoria Christopher Murray provides like this sort of story to get us into what it was like being in Harlem in the 20s, the roaring 20s at that. This is prior to the crash of 1929 and what we really understand to be the Harlem Renaissance, which comes sort of at that tail end of the 1920s into the 1930s and 40s. And so Fawcett, she is highly educated, like first woman at the time, to her knowledge, Black woman to have received a Phi Beta Kappa key. She studied at the Sorbonne in Paris, and she was fluent in French and just really accomplished. And so for her to become the literary editor of a major publication was a big deal, but also the things that she likely had to face as a Black woman who is in this space, and, you know, misogyny and misogynoir present. And we get a sense of that, especially with how she navigates not only being in relationship with W.E.B. Du Bois, but also trying to do her job. And there's this one scene where she is trying to get the costs cut for the magazine, and she goes to the sort of printer, and who is a white guy, and is like, "Oh, I thought I was talking to whatever kind of man, blah 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 blah." And she's like, "Well, no, you're talking to me." And he's like, "Well, you're just a little woman, more or less." And she starts reading him, and ends up getting the paper quality, the cost of production lowered by like 25%. And so whether that's real or not, beside the point, but it sort of speaks to what social things that she had to go through. And the fact that we get the part of Du Bois' story where he's like a notorious womanizer. And I wouldn't... Yeah, we'll say that, because he had multiple lovers, apparently, and, you know, is married to his wife, Nina. And so, because he's traveling a lot, he's like one of the most prolific men in end of the 19th century into the 20th century. He's part of the New Negro movement. He starts the NAACP out of the Niagara movement. And, you know, he's doing all of this great work, starts Crisis Magazine, which gets a lot of Black people published, as well as giving news and stories and uplift for the Black community. So he's doing a lot of really significant work. And so you get a lot of Du Bois' work, the Pan-African Conference. You have mentions of Marcus Garvey. You get mentions of Claude McKay, who Jessie Redmon Fauset worked with, Jean Toomer, who she also worked with and was an editor for. She pretty much helps to discover and put on Langston Hughes, County Cullen, right? At the end, we get a little bit of a cameo from Zora Neale Hurston, who is starting to make waves by like by 1925. And I'm not sure, I think the Urban League's the Urban League's writers contest was a real thing, but I'm not sure, because the dates and things are a little bit skewed, but especially there is actually an event, a fundraising gala of some sort, where Black writers are getting recognized. Zora Hurston is there for her short story, Swamp. It's either Spunk or Sweat, and she wins awards for it. Langston Hughes is there. Alain Locke is there. And the fact that both Du Bois and Alain Locke represent the New Negro movement, which is this sort of socio-political movement for Black people to engage in racial uplift. Du Bois is still very much on his talented 10th things. And we get all of that in sort of how Jessie Redmon Fauset is at the epicenter of that, because she's doing the work to help these people get put on. And you get things like Gene Toomer's struggle with his understanding of his own identity because he is biracial, and also not wanting to be pegged as a Black writer, right? And we've seen that in other places too, and how that raises questions about what it means to be a writer, but also to be culturally specific in ways, and how the publishing industry and society sort of discounts and devalues writers when they are writing for and about their people in particular ways. That being said, again, I absolutely enjoyed this book so much. And as someone who is deeply aware of the writings of the Harlem Renaissance. Oh, also that Jessie Redmon Fauset was really good friends with Nella Larson, who they were writing at the same time. And eventually she puts Nella on too. And Nella writes Quicksand and Passing, which were her famous works, and how eventually Jessie Redmon Fauset too publishes her books, and they do really well. So her first book is There Is Confusion, and her second book is Plum Bun, which I have plans to read next, because now I do want to get back into reading some of Harlem Renaissance writers, right? Because I have read some. Now, I did say that the other part of this is that I want to provide a little bit teaching moment to help you to decide how to get into Harlem Renaissance writing. And I do this in the way that I would for people who are not expressly readers, or like I would do for my students who, things like dialect and the syntax of the time might become barriers to being able to read certain things, right? And that is definitely going to be the case with much of the writing from the early 20th century up through probably 1950s, 60s. So with that in mind, here's what I would suggest if you were going to do some more Harlem Renaissance things. And I also, at the end, want to help pop your Harlem Renaissance cherry for those of you who have not gone into Harlem Renaissance literature yet. So if I was going to get into reading things that were published in the Harlem Renaissance, and if you see me looking down, I'm looking at my iPad where things tend to live, I would start with the poetry, right? So definitely get into Langston Hughes's poetry, also Claude McKay and County Cullen. But then I would also say short stories. Short stories are super helpful because, again, they are a little less daunting and a little bit less intimidating, and you can finish them with a little bit more quickness. So definitely getting into Zora Hurston's either Spunk or Sweat. I have assigned Sweat as a reading, and Spunk is about a woman who is twice divorced and living her life in the midst of that. And then Sweat is about a woman who is hardworking and her husband is a piece of trash. And what happens with that relationship, how people see her, how she sees herself, and how she navigates pretty much being verbally abused and neglected in her marriage, but also financially supporting this man. It's really good. And the end is quite satisfying. I am planning on now reading Jessie Redmon Fauset's novels, at least one of them. I think I'm going to actually read Plum, and I love the fact that the sort of subtitle of it is a novel without a moral. And it is supposedly a romance about an older woman, like 35 years old. So I personally am going to pick that one up. I probably will have to get it from the library or get my own copy. And then I would say The Blacker the Berry by Wallace Thurman. And people don't talk about Wallace Thurman very much, but I enjoyed Blacker the Berry, and it was an older classmate of mine when I was in seminary that let me borrow her copy of Blacker the Berry, and I really enjoyed that as a novel. So it's written in 1929, and it is a novel that deals with not only colorism, but Black respectability politics and racism in terms of Black beauty standards. The main character is a person who has deeply Black skin, and the ways in which sort of she is treated in the midst of that. And it is, I think, also somewhat a romance, if I remember correctly. This is probably one that I will read over. Then I would also suggest Jean Toomer's Cane, because it is such a good piece of writing, but also because it is a novel written in sort of vignettes. So even if you didn't read the full book, you could read a couple of the vignettes out of the text. And one that I saw is called Fern, and it is about a woman who has striking eyes, and people like fall in love with her, and especially men like fall for her and then desire her. And once they, have her, they get into like sort of this deeper sense of longing for who she is once they sort of start getting to know her. So Cane would be another good one to read that also you could read as sets of short stories. So you don't have to necessarily read the whole thing, but you could get a sensation of finishing it and seeing how you like it. Now, what I would do in terms of thinking through any of these texts is, one, what is being said about race and the lived experience of Black people through the characters that you're encountering? What does the setting, so we're talking about turn of the century up through like the 1920s, 30s, depending on when it was published, the work is published. How are Black folks living? What is being said regionally about these experiences? And then lastly, what are some of the underlying issues that potentially make any of the characters compelling or not likable? So those are a few questions that you could use to lead to help you think through what you're reading. And that's just me on my educator tip. How I would, and what I think about when I'm reading many texts is how these things are interacting with one another. So, as I said, I wanted to end with, especially if you haven't done Harlem Renaissance literature at all, I'm actually going to read a poem from the Harlem Renaissance, and I'm going to read Claude McKay's If I Must Die. Here we go. Enjoy. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our accursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us die, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe, though far outnumbered, let us show brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. All right, friends, what do you think? How'd you like Claude McKay? Have you read Harlem Rhapsody? Is it on your book list? If not, it definitely should be. Let me know in the downstairs area or the comment section. And as always, friends, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, tell a friend about the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.